Welcome to this i3TV recording featuring Joe Sheehan. Today, we're going to be talking about the case for on-premises hydrogen production in data centres for its greenhouse gas abatement benefits. So, Joe, you can't really turn on the TV or listen to the radio these days without hearing about hydrogen. What is it about this magic element that's going to rescue us all and help us to go carbon net neutral?
Yeah, that's right, Damien. It's pretty big subject that seems to be everywhere at the moment. I actually wrote a thesis about hydrogen 20 years ago when I was at university, and it was quite a big subject then, but it just seems to have grown exponentially since then. It still seems like it's not yet been unlocked, but there's a lot more pressure now for net zero and carbon zero, and I think it's becoming of more and more interest to more and more industries to a greater extent. Personally, I think the appeal is the simplicity of it. It's the simplest atom in the universe. It's basically like a hydrocarbon, but without the carbon. So it's got all the good stuff, which is the energy, and none of the bad stuff. So it's very simple. It's the most abundant element in the universe. When you look up at night and you see all those stars, there's 99.999% of the universe is full of it. Unfortunately, down on Earth, it comes attached with baggage. So it's very hard to find hydrogen on Earth on its own, just in the form where it's got this access to the energy within it. Most famously, it's in water, H2O, but obviously all the hydrocarbons, which our economy is based on, is hydrogen attached to carbon, and the carbon's obviously the difficult bit. So that's where I see the appeal. I mean, obviously there are some big industries now that are looking to hydrogen to solve some of these big challenges, particularly the oil and gas industry. I think they probably look at it as a way to pivot away from hydrocarbons, but still, maintain the existing infrastructure and assets that they operate. And yeah, it's a really good opportunity to solve some of our biggest problems. It has some big challenges with it and some gotchas, which hopefully we can talk about. But yeah, it's really good. I mean, obviously the biggest problem with hydrogen at the moment is how to produce it. Currently, most hydrogen that's produced for current uses in various industries is done by reforming natural gas. So basically, you're starting with a hydrocarbon and stripping out the carbon, and that process obviously releases carbon dioxide. So that doesn't offer the benefits that we're looking for in greenhouse gas abatement, because you've still got the same problem and byproduct there. There's a type of hydrogen. All these hydrogen production methods have colours associated with them. So that's called grey hydrogen. There's another one which is blue hydrogen, where same process, but there's a commitment to sequester and capture that carbon emissions, which, carbon sequestration is its own subject. And, there's some questions there about how reliable that process is in the long term and the cost of it and all sorts of things. So the bit that I've always been very interested in and offers the maximum benefit in terms of greenhouse gas reduction is green hydrogen. And that's essentially where you take a molecule that has very low energy, which is water, and is a combination of hydrogen and oxygen, and you split that up. And you split it up by putting energy into that molecule and effectively storing it. So it becomes like a kind of energy or battery energy storage process. And that's, again, where the appeal is. There's something very simple about that. I can personally remember doing that experiment at secondary school. Electrolysis of water. You put electricity through water, and at the anode one gas is formed, and at the cathode another one is, and you just collect them off. So it's a very simple process, and some hydrogen is currently made that way. But the golden goal in all of that is to use energy that is renewable, such as wind, solar, and so on, and put that electricity in through electrolyzers and produce your hydrogen. So, and that's what's called green hydrogen. And yeah, it's a very simple process. But it could be the key to unlocking a type of fuel that can be produced, transported around, goes into all these different industries, like transport, buildings, heavy industry. It's a source of fuel that can all be taken from renewables, and data centers is obviously the application that we're interested in, and that's what I've made the subject of my paper so far.
Excellent. How safe is hydrogen? I suppose we've all got this kind of idea of the Hindenburg blowing up.
That's right. So I think generally safety standards have improved since 90 years ago. Putting all that hydrogen in a big balloon, probably no one would do that now. But there, it does have a different risk profile. It's an explosive gas. You have to store it under pressure, or that's certainly one of the most typical ways of storing hydrogen. So it does present risks. But I think those risks are engineering challenges that have solutions to them, and a modern approach to safety management would mitigate those risks. But that's definitely a factor, because those measures have costs and they need to be factored in the engineering solutions. But certainly they don't present an insurmountable barrier to use of hydrogen, in my opinion, at least.
They're not unfamiliar risks, are they? I mean, we have petroleum and we have liquid natural gas and so on and so forth.
That's right. Yeah, we deal with explosive materials, and there's different solutions. And like, if you take where they're used in vehicles, for example, hydrogen is a very light gas, so when it combusts, it tends to go up pretty quickly. So you'll see all the buses around. Well, I've noticed them in London, hydrogen buses. They put all these fuel stores on the roof. So, but yeah, it's something that needs to be managed. I don't think there are any recent disaster stories attached to hydrogen. It's I think that's because we've got better at engineering these solutions since then.
I think I read the other day that Aberdeen has a very strong investment in using hydrogen for its public transportation, for its buses up there. So a good pilot project going.
Yeah, there's some really great pilot schemes for hydrogen all over the place. And yeah, it's true, in Scotland there's a lot more schemes. I think there's one of the Outer Hebrides, one of the islands, is trying to exist purely using hydrogen and local hydrogen production. No, it's really good. There's a lot of really good schemes around.
Good stuff. So in an ideal world, then, we want to produce green hydrogen, and we want to do that, using renewable power from wind farms, solar farms, etc., to power the electrolysis to enable us to sort of produce and then store hydrogen. Talk to us about the sorts of applications in the data center, then, Joe, that you foresee, because we ran a poll recently on on LinkedIn for i3 Solutions.
Yeah, I saw that.
And the market seems to be very strongly in favour of hydrogen. Well, people seem to be quite polarised about it. Either primary or secondary, but probably not both. So where do you think the future is?
So I think primary is the right answer. If the obvious place to slide hydrogen in a data center is the power generation. So currently data centers have standby generators that are typically diesel fueled, and they store that diesel. So you can notionally swap those components out for hydrogen components. So the generator would become, for example, a fuel cell. I mean, there are other mechanisms for getting the energy back out of hydrogen into electricity. So there's internal combustion engines that run on hydrogen as well. But yeah, you could swap one of those two in for the generators, and you could swap the diesel fuel storage for hydrogen fuel storage. And there's lots of different technologies and approaches to storing hydrogen. But in terms of application, you could swap those two things out, but you'd have to look at that and say, well, where's the value there? Because a diesel generator, it only runs a handful of hours each year on test, and very rarely you actually have a genuine power outage that would require them. So to invest all that technology in replacing those elements with hydrogen technology, there's not a lot of benefit there, because you're not offsetting a lot of carbon emissions. So if you swap to primary, where you're continuously running those generators and you're using green hydrogen, that would obviously bring about some real value, because you're taking all that electrical consumption of your data center and you're changing it over to a genuine source of renewable energy in the form of green hydrogen. But then that has its own problem, because the hydrogen economy, it's not here yet. There isn't a supply infrastructure. There's no piped hydrogen. The practicalities of bringing in vessels with compressed hydrogen at a fast enough rate and volume to actually provide the full, continuous operation of a data center fueled by hydrogen, it's completely impractical, in my opinion, certainly with bottles of vessels and on the scale of modern data centers. So there's a bit of a conflict there. You need to use it continuously, but there's not a continuous supply. And that's where my interest in on-site production of hydrogen came in, because if you can produce it yourself, then you've got a continuous supply, and you're not waiting for the hydrogen delivery network to come about. You're sort of jumping the gun, and you're doing it yourself essentially, which is appealing to me.
So notionally, then, this idea of kind of producing it on premise, which seems to be forward thinking, right? So you have your own hydrogen plant, and then you run your internal combustion engine, or however you decide to generate electricity, your fuel cell on hydrogen fuel. But you do that all on site with no transportation and none of the storage issues that I'm sure we'll get on to cover. You did some research though, didn't you? So the research that you did, what did you set out to prove or disprove?
Well, so I set out to question, and it's an open question: is it of value or is it not of value to produce hydrogen on site? Does it actually offer a benefit? Because obviously to produce.
No, I was just going to say, but to be clear, does it offer a benefit in terms of greenhouse gas abatement? Benefits the environment.
Exactly. So coming back to what we were speaking about earlier, you need to produce your hydrogen. You need some energy to produce it, and the green way to do it is to produce it from water, typically by electrolysis of water. So where are you going to get that energy from? We don't have a source of energy on site except for the electricity that we take off the grid, or you could. There's obviously you've got gas utilities as well, but if we're talking about producing hydrogen from electrolysis, it's electricity. So the idea I've developed there is that you could use hydrogen as a form of grid level energy storage. So you take electricity from the grid at times when carbon intensity is low on the grid. So this is when the wind is blowing, demand is low, or the sun is shining, and the carbon emissions associated with each kilowatt hour of grid electricity are very low. And you could take surplus energy at that time from the grid, use it to produce hydrogen locally, and effectively use that as a battery, so that when you're on the flip side and the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining, and the UK or whatever country you're in has had to bring on more coal power plants or whatever it is to meet the peak under those circumstances because of high demand with low renewables, and you've got high carbon intensity, you can actually reduce your demand by using the hydrogen energy that you've stored up. So it's a form of carbon trading, effectively, where you use your energy storage to move these carbon emissions about and achieve an overall net gain. So to me, that was an interesting question. The only way I felt I could answer it was by building a little mathematical model using some real world carbon intensity data, which is publicly available from Grid Network, so you can get it in the UK and Ireland. And I built a little mathematical model that sets up the control system and the regime that you'd have to instigate to do that process that I just described, and work out what benefits does it bring about. How much carbon emissions can you gain from doing this sort of process. And in the process, I've looked at the different technologies. You still need some form of storage there, because you're basically taking in that energy, making hydrogen, looking after it, moving it in time to discharge it. So we need storage. For the purpose of my model, I selected some leading technologies. So I went with PEM electrolyzers for hydrogen production, compressed hydrogen for the storage, and again PEM proton exchange membrane fuel cells for converting that hydrogen back into electricity. And I used the fairly well established data about what efficiencies you can get from those bits of technology to build into that model. And I took a typical data center, a 10 megawatt one. I've chose a few different locations around the UK. Obviously, you've got more variable renewables in places like Ireland and Scotland as opposed to the UK nationally or the southeast. And I've been running those models to see what we can actually bring about by if you applied such a concept.
And what did you find out?
So so far, unfortunately, the returns are quite modest in terms of carbon emissions. You could, in places like Scotland where you've got a lot of renewables and it swings around a lot, you can get about 10% of your energy or carbon emissions from a data center are reduced. That was about 500 annual tons of carbon. It's quite a lot. Interestingly, the percentage in the southeast of the UK was smaller. It was only 2 to 3%. But interestingly, that worked out to be the same carbon reduction in absolute terms, because down in the south you've got higher grid carbon intensity, so the carbon costs are higher there. So even a small percentage is a equivalent saving. So yeah, it's and I'm still working through this paper at the moment. There's different. I've set up a control regime where you arbitrarily charge and discharge at fixed set points, but the point in the year, it's a bit like following the stock market. You'll buy some extra electricity at low carbon intensity, assuming that it's going to go high. And I'm looking at different control regimes to try and maybe move those set points around to make slightly better trading judgments against the carbon intensity as it fluctuates. So there's still some scope that will improve. But yeah, the returns are modest, unfortunately, and that needs to be weighed up against the cost of applying the hydrogen technology to data centers on that scale. So, I mean, yeah. In conclusion, that obviously, it's answered the question. It does provide some useful input about how we can best integrate hydrogen. To me, it points towards a need to coordinate with these facilities where they're being developed at grid level anyway. It essentially says, wouldn't it really, we need to bring data centers closer to the location of renewables, wind farms, where there are grid level energy storage solutions, including hydrogen ones, that are doing this. So you can do it at a point of production. But yeah, it's also helped us understand how battery energy storage could be used in conjunction with the grid for a range of technologies, not just hydrogen, but all forms of energy storage that you get in data centers. So it's quite a good tool that we've developed that we can apply for our data center designs for all types of energy storage systems and see what benefits they can bring about in terms of carbon reduction. So it's been a really useful exercise.
It sort of throws up some interesting things, doesn't it? Because traditionally, I suppose what you don't want to do from an efficiency point of view is generate your electricity where your people aren't, because the cost of transmission, both as an environmental, and an actual cost is very high. At the same time, nobody wants a wind farm at the end of the garden. Nobody wants a coal plant, where their park is. At the same time, they don't want data centers, at the end of the street. So, I don't know whether it's for historic reasons, but data centers tend to be where people and power and water is, and then we brought the connectivity in. Do you think the fact that we've got these kind of massive pipelines going past the coastline now means that we could push, we can eliminate the latency problem and push the data centers further away from people?
I think, yeah, you're right. There is that kind of geographical challenge, isn't there, where the renewables tend to be in remote locations and the data centers are close to populations. The fiber connections are also close to populations. I mean, obviously you've got edge computing now, where there's a desire to build more remote data centers on medium and small scale. It is a challenge. I mean, hydrogen should be, in the long run, should be a mechanism for transporting energy. It can store energy, you can compress it, you can store it cryogenically, and it can cover distances. And there's also a lot of schemes where looking at how hydrogen can be piped. So there's some schemes in the north of England where they're looking at injecting a certain amount of hydrogen into the natural gas network and transporting it that way. And in the long run, depending on your point of view, the end goal for hydrogen might involve a dedicated hydrogen network, which can bring that energy closer to the locations where it's required. But yeah, I like, personally, I live in Scotland, and I like to think that the fibre connections are going to develop, because Scotland's got some great credentials for sustainable data centres because of the environment here and the access to renewables. So I personally certainly hope that those fibre connections improve for the types of places where there are more renewables.
Sorry for taking you down that diversion, Joe. I know we didn't plan to do that.
No, that's fine.
Just to go back to sort of more about the things that we were originally planned to talk about. What in your view kind of is holding hydrogen back from being a renewable source of energy, and a viable source of electricity to power data centers and other applications?
So I think the big one is the cost of production of green hydrogen. You obviously need the renewable energy. I think that's going to come down, the cost of green hydrogen production. There's a lot of those headlines you mentioned at the beginning. They're about large growth in the scale of electrolyzer production and plants that are going to be built to do exactly this process at larger scales. So green hydrogen is going to become more available. And as it becomes more widespread, the cost and economy of scale is going to improve. You've obviously got the increased cost of hydrocarbons and fuel, oil and gas. So that equation is going to improve for hydrogen. But that is the current biggest challenge. And then the second one, which will hopefully become more solvable once that economic equation improves, is the transport of hydrogen, and that's where I'm going to focus my next piece of work after I can finish looking at on-site production. And that being one of the main conclusions, is really we need to, if we're going to use hydrogen data centers, we need to transport it, because producing it on site doesn't bring about the large scale greenhouse gas reductions I was hoping for. So yeah, I think that's the next challenge, is how can we move it around? What are the storage technologies? How far can they go? What are the losses? What's the scope for piping hydrogen around and delivering it to data centers? It seems a bit long-term thinking, because a gas pipe network on a national level is a pretty tall order. But yeah, I think if it's going to succeed, those are the sorts of things we need to start looking at.
Got you. And then in terms of sort of the next steps for the data center, what do you think, if you're designing or developing data centers, what do you think you should be doing about hydrogen? And I noticed, that some of the large, say, diesel engine manufacturers, for example, are now making combustion engines that will convert to hydrogen or run hydrogen with very little re-engineering.
Well, yeah, that's right. I think what data centers need to be doing now is future-proofing them for this growth. We're still on the stepping stones of hydrogen, but as it grows, we need to be ready for it. So we need to consider how we could have components in our data center design, such as hydrogen-fueled reciprocating engines, but a level of flexibility in our design so that those components can be brought in, so that we're compatible with those solutions. Because as conventional designs continue, in the absence of a reliable source of green hydrogen, we're going to continue with other technologies and other greenhouse gas solutions. But if we can future-proof our designs to accommodate them, and look at some of these pilot schemes and how they could be integrated on a small scale, I think that's how we need to sort of keep our head up and see these things coming and be prepared for them in the design work we do.
Got you. I guess like many design solutions, there are going to be instances where green hydrogen is the right solution, and other instances where, whatever it is, a wind farm at the end of the road is going to.
Yeah, I mean, I think this comes down, I think that some of those instances will be geographical, when there might be an opportunity to build a data center in a location where we happen to be near one of these big pilot schemes for hydrogen production. If it's down the road, that's going to present itself as a fantastic opportunity. And those solutions can be considered right now.
Got you. And without asking you sort of to look too far into the future or consult your crystal ball too closely, is this stuff going to mature quickly enough for it to be useful by 2050, or do you think it's a far more long-term solution?
You're right. That is quite a difficult question. And it's hard not to look at some adjacent industries that are going to probably turn to hydrogen sooner. If you look at what's going on in the transport market with electric vehicles, people obviously, electrical vehicles have taken off now, but everyone has the challenge of how long it takes to charge up their electric car if they're covering large distances. Hydrogen's a great solution there. It has its challenges, and you'll hear different opinions about this, but if hydrogen was to become widespread and there was a fueling network to deliver hydrogen to vehicles around this country, it would become so widespread it would become a viable option. And we have, the technology exists to exploit that as soon as that becomes widespread. So I think definitely, 2050 is still a long way away, and I think hydrogen's definitely going to play a role there. But it's going to have to become more widespread across a whole range of industries. But I can see that coming if you believe even half the headlines you see.
Joe, thank you very much for talking us through, your views on hydrogen and its place, maybe for on-site production with data centers. Question for you, people that are interested in this subject, what should their next steps be? How should they kind of maybe keep in touch with you?
In terms of keeping in touch with me, you can look me up on LinkedIn anytime you like. Obviously, you can go to the i3 Solutions website. My face is up there with my contact details. So definitely anyone who's interested in this subject and would like to explore it for their data center design, definitely reach out. I'd be very, very interested to speak to you.
Well, thanks again, Joe, very much for that. Sounds like we'll be talking again about Scotland's potential for green data centres. So
absolutely.
I look forward to that conversation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Damien. Thank you. Catch you later.